in after the start. So thank you everybody for joining us, and welcome to the 5th webinar for the National Varroa Transition to Management. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are all working from and participating from different nations across the country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. If we go to the next slide, this evening's webinar is all about monitoring. We welcome Rod Burke from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development to cover everything that we would like beekeepers to take on board and learn about monitoring for Varroa mite. We'll go from the beginning of Varroa all the way through to why, covering critical details around where to take bees from your brood box to do your hive monitoring, and also to look at why we would do it more frequently once we have Varroa, and now that we do have Varroa in Australia, to encourage everybody to check their bees as much as possible. And Rod's got some really fantastic insights and hands-on experience now, especially with Varroa. And we're also going to be looking at calculating mite loads from a sample, and a couple of other really important factors about looking at Varroa and managing colonies. So I just wanted to, we might just mention that the webinar was planned to go for an hour and a half, but we're looking at potentially closing off after about an hour. So we just have Rod presenting, and we're hoping that this evening we may be finishing by about 8 p.m, which means everyone can get back to their families and listening in on their general things that they do in the afternoon. So thanks for joining us. We just wanted to promote a little bit about ARBIC. If you check out the honeybee.org.au website, you'll see a whole bunch of details in there about what ARBIC does. We are a non-profit organisation, and we do kindly recommend that you become a friend of ARBIC to support the work that helps us support the beekeeping industry. To date, there's really great information on our ARBIC website, and we now have a varroa.org.au website, which is part of the National Transition to Management program. We are slowly building a lot of the content that's being created under the program that's all to do with Varroa and everything that you'll need to know and how to contact individuals in your state. So have a look at that varroa.org.au webpage at your leisure. And just to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and will be provided in the coming days to the industry via the ARBIC's YouTube channel, and we'll also be supplying details for beekeepers through the National Varroa mite regular, often weekly updates to beekeepers. So check out the varroa.org website to make sure that you're subscribed to that detail, and you'll receive a copy of this webinar once it's been completed. So I'd like to hand over to Rod. He's going to share his screen with us, and we're going to get straight into the concept of all the things we'd like to know about monitoring for Varroa.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you can hear me. Bianca, raise your hand if you can hear me. All good? Great, thank you. Well, we'll talk about spring hive monitoring and Varroa mite surveillance. Obviously, you should be monitoring all the time, not just in spring. But spring has sprung and here we are, and for people with Varroa mites, it's an interesting time. And I'm not getting it to move to the next screen, so I have to see how I can sort that out. I love this. Now I can't even get it to go down. So we'll stop the share. I will try and get that going again. Apologies, these little gremlins are here to test us. Let's go to slideshow. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so Bianca, can you see that okay?
I can't see your slides at all.
Okay, well, that's not very good, is it?
That's not fair.
Let's go back to the beginning, and then I love this sort of thing. It worked when we tried it beforehand.
We were all prepared.
How embarrassing, eh? Where did it go to?
I might also mention while we're waiting that I forgot to say, if everybody could please put your questions in the Q&A function down below so that we can answer them at the end of the presentation session.
I can share for you, Rod, if you like.
Yeah, there are lots and lots of going forward. So if I can try to get it, that would help. But yes, it's very frustrating when these things happen. I will try one last time. Hopefully it's there. Okay, let's see how this goes. Can you see that?
We can see that.
Okay, great.
Yes, you clicked through.
Okay,
Did
thank you. Sorry, everyone, for that. Okay, so first I'll talk about Bee Biosecurity Officers. That's something very close to my heart. And they are very important people. And, you know, my role is an industry funded role, meaning that it comes from the honey levy. So there are a lot of people that contribute to the honey levy, and unfortunately, there are also a lot of beekeepers that should that don't. So please, if you're producing more than 1,500 kilos of honey a year, please start paying your compulsory honey levy, because we need that to support programs. Other BBOs are supported by the beekeeper registrations and the National Bee Pest Surveillance Program that's here in New South Wales, and many other states have similar arrangements for their BBOs. So in the states with BBOs, they promote all aspects of the Australian Honeybee Industry Biosecurity Code of Practice, which we refer to as the Code, and that includes conducting regular brood inspections and undertaking mite surveillance, which for a lot of us is normal practice, but there are also a lot of people out there that they don't do that. So we try to get everyone to follow the code. So in New South Wales, BBOs do not undertake any apiary compliance activities, and neither do the Varroa Development Officers or the VDOs. So they're not compliance, they're out there to help with extension, engagement and education. But we may attend significant apiary operations as observers, such as almond pollination events, and utilise those learnings for future training or in written articles, because that's really important part of our job, showing things that are going right or wrong so that people can see and learn from that. So BBOs assist beekeepers to manage their bee biosecurity, which is pests and diseases. It's not compliance. Biosecurity is not compliance. It's managing your pests and diseases so it doesn't impact you or people around you. And also all of their code requirements, everything they need to know about for the code, we're there to help them. So basically, BBOs and VDOs are there to help you. So we're there to help you to do the best beekeeping that you can. Now, also as part of that, we have the National Bee Pest Surveillance Program, and those hives are in place at identified high-risk ports throughout Australia, and they're there to intercept exotic bee pest incursions that may arrive via that particular port on a container ship or some other operation that's bringing stuff into the port. So we all know on the 22nd of June 2022 that 2 of the 6 Newcastle Port Central hives were found to have 1 and 5 mites respectively on their sticky mats. And that was after 1 week of miticide application in a routine surveillance event. They generally get surveilled every 6 to 8 weeks or so to look for pests, depending on the time of the year. So that was very, very shocking to us. Mark Page and myself were down there that day to euthanize those hives, and it was very shocking. And that was the first ever reported presence of Varroa destructor in New South Wales. And we initially believed that it likely recently arrived at the port and our Sentinel hives had picked it up, because that's a whole scenario of the bee pest surveillance program. So the largest bee emergency response in Australia began, and we all got in our little contamination suits there to go and do stuff, not normal beekeeping stuff, a lot of going in clean, decontaminating, coming out clean to stop the opportunity for varroa mite to possibly be spread, because we did know how widespread it was early on. But on the Saturday, we found alcohol wash results like this: 50 plus mites in hives that are over 10 kilometres from the port. So very quickly, attention changed from it has just come in from the port to varroa mite is here and we don't even know how long it's been here for. So that was the start of a very big operation. And as we went out looking, we were finding mites everywhere. And the highest numbers were a long way from the port of Newcastle. And a lot of these mite numbers were so high that even 2 to 3 months prior, during Sugar Shake month, they should have been easily discoverable. They would have been there. You would have found 1 or 2 mites minimum, if not 10 or 20 mites. They would have been found. In all honesty, most Australian beekeepers thought there were no mites in the country. So understandably, many did not really bother to look for them very hard. And many beekeepers have told me just that. They weren't really looking. They were pretty comfortable with Australia was free of varroa mites, and so why bother spending the time looking? So we've got to change all that now. Mites are here, and that attitude needs to switch to being constantly vigilant about finding and managing the numbers of mites in your hives. They're here, they're moving. You've got to start looking for them if you're not already. Basically, it's sink or swim. And we want most of you to be able to swim. Some people will sink and leave the industry, but realistically, we want most of you to stay, and that means educating yourself to manage varroa mites. And early on in the surveillance, one thing that became really evident was how many beekeepers were not managing their hives very well or managing them at all. We were going to all these locations, and some of what we saw was pretty bad. There was American foul brood rampant in some areas, unmanaged American foul brood, and it was obvious many hives had not been open for a very long time, 6 to 12 months minimum, and some of them a lot longer than that. So they weren't managed bee colonies. They had bees, but they weren't managed. We were seeing things like this everywhere. Stuff didn't even have all the frames in the hives. Stuff was falling apart, junk left everywhere. Not the sort of thing that you want to have your clean bees nearby. Some of these hives, we actually had to cut the lantana to get into them. We could see where the bees were flying to, but we had to cut it to get at the beehive. And some of these hives have been dead out for so long that the skinks and everything lived in them. They'd fallen apart, just really bad biosecurity risks. Even ones like this one that it had fallen or rotted off its bottom board, and the bees were actually getting in through a rotten part of their bottom board. Only way they had getting into the hive. So not managed at all. So when varroa is added to the equation, it becomes extremely difficult keeping neglected, unmanaged, and poorly managed hives alive. It's that extra layer that makes it harder for these bees to continue to be there without much management at all. So unless beekeepers are prepared to increase their amount of management per hive, which basically means spending extra time on every hive that you have, then hive losses will increase. Every hive that is lost to varroa first breeds up tens of thousands of mites within it, and that colony becomes what is referred to as a mite bomb, meaning that those mites go all over the place and they spread to every other bee colony in the area. When you start seeing varroa mites on bees on the ground, you know that you're near a mite bomb. And then sometimes you'll even see 2 mites on a bee. There are huge amounts of mites in these colonies, and those mites are just looking for the next beehive to go into. So many of these mites will be spread in the area to other colonies in the area via forage or bee interaction on floral resources, or through robbing behaviour into the stricken colony itself. And of course, we all know that robbing also leads to a high risk of AFB. Taking those spores back to their colony in honey can be a deadly combo. So this is often referred to as reinfestation or reinvasion, where external mites from the environment enter your hives. So during the current build-up phase, this will be particularly catastrophic to beekeepers who do not regularly monitor their hives. As many hundreds of mites per week may potentially enter their hives, all coming in from the environment. We think about one mite enters a hive and it breeds up slowly and it may take years to become evident. That's if there's one mite. When you have hundreds of colonies in an area that are all building up mites and starting to collapse, that's thousands and thousands of mites that are transferring to other colonies all the time. It's not like that slow build up. This is really quick influx of mites in a beehives. You'll see bees all over the ground when they've got mites on them. This is outside a colony that had over 200 mites in the wash. They're just sitting there. Those bees aren't real good, but they had mites on them. And then you look at this. Here we've got 3 bees in one flower. If one of those bees had a mite on it, coming from a hive where it's not looking so good, that mite could come off and get on any one of those other bees and go to another hive. So it's a very, very common way that mites get spread. So varroa mites are the most serious pests of honeybees worldwide. You know, some people were not happy with the emergency response, but once they have to beekeep with mites all the time, they will realise we didn't want it here, we wanted to keep it out. And we had to go to extreme measures to try and do that. And we all know it didn't work, and maybe it wouldn't have worked ever due to the spread, but we don't know, we had to try. But previously, Australia was touted as the only major beekeeping continent without varroa mites, and we were very, very lucky, the lucky beekeeping country. But now the grim reality is that having varroa mites and having them kill our bees includes Australia. So we have to shift in how we think about approaching our beehive management. Basically, varroa feeds on both adult and pupil bees. It's a very simplified way of describing it. But ultimately, this increasing stress results in decreasing colony health and eventually their demise. Very simplified, but that's basically what happens when you get more and more mites in a colony feeding on the bee population. And when varroa arrives to an area, the unmanaged bee colonies will eventually succumb to high mite numbers. This includes long-term established feral colonies. They could have been in a wall cavity for 10 or 20 years. That's not going to keep happening. Swarms from early in the current season or from the previous season, they're all going to build up mites and eventually perish. Hives that the beekeeper leaves be or manages naturally, they don't really want to interfere in them, let them do their stuff. They're going to end up dying from varroa mites. Anything that's neglected or abandoned, and those that do not get monitored frequently enough, are all going to succumb to high mite numbers. There they are. These are the little critters, horrible little things. And this is what happens. That's on a bottom board before the mites have taken out your colony. The numbers of mites in there become catastrophic. 50, 60,000 or more even. More than one mite per bee feeding. It's really tough on a colony. Eventually they can't keep going. And feral bees are everywhere. These are just a few of the places that we found feral bee colonies in Newcastle in 23. You can see in service pits or the Telstra pits, colonies everywhere. The gate, that's like a concrete gate with a metal piece of pipe. And you can see there the bees were going in through a very small hole. It was very interesting watching the pest controller try to take that colony out because it took a lot of work. It was quite destructive to get at it. You'll see bees up in metal power poles. You will see them in the walls of old houses, new houses, everywhere. So there are feral bees everywhere, and early on they're all going to turn into mite bombs. But note, any unmanaged hives that do survive long-term with varroa presence may become interesting to queen breeders due to the genetics. They might suppress mite breeding, something like that. But that's not likely to occur until varroa has been established for some time, like we're talking many years, because the reinfestation is very hard for any bee colony to handle. So if you're thinking about doing your own type of genetics here, you might want to hold off until the main wave has passed. Just keep your bees alive. That's going to be the most important thing early on, and you can look at all these things a little bit down the track. But after all that scary stuff, because I don't want to completely scare you so that you'll leave the industry and have nightmares. The presence of varroa does not mean the guaranteed death of your bees and the end of beekeeping in your area. That's up to you. Managed bee colonies will generally survive varroa mite. Not 100%, but most of them will. I've been beekeeping with varroa for 1 year now, and I have not directly lost any hives to varroa. Hive beetle, they've smashed me, and maybe varroa had something to do with a couple of those, but I have not lost hives to varroa mite. Good beekeepers will survive, and others will learn to become good beekeepers. But this is one to think about. If that all sounds too hard for you, then perhaps choose a different hobby or occupation, please. If you can't do enough to keep your bees going with varroa mites, you may want to think about something else. So managing your hives in many states following the Australian Honeybee Industry Biosecurity Code of Practice, it's a requirement of beekeepers' registration. So part of being a registered beekeeper is that you need to follow the code. So the code sets out minimum requirements for hive management, including Section 3, which is hives must be regularly inspected for pests and diseases. You look at 3.1, and this is something, there are beekeepers that don't even do this minimum amount of inspections yet. They need to regularly inspect every hive in their apiaries, every hive that they manage across the board for hive strength and the presence of pests and diseases. That's all pests and diseases. And this includes undertaking as often as necessary, or at least 2 thorough brood inspections per season that are at least 4 months apart, meaning you don't just inspect twice in 2 weeks and you leave it for a year. There needs to be regular inspections as a bare minimum. And then 3.2 is also that you would be looking at 1 hive in each apiary looking for pests such as varroa mite, which was using sugar shake, alcohol wash, or drone uncapping. That's what's been set out in the code before varroa mites arrived. So managing pests and diseases means looking for them first. So obviously, if I saw this many hive beetles in my hive, I would think, well, I probably need to manage these. We now look at a hive beetle compared to a varroa mite. There's a massive size difference. You are not going to visibly see high numbers of varroa mites in your bees and know that it's time to manage. You have to use an effective monitoring method to find them. They're very small. A lot of us cannot actually see them with the naked eye clearly or at all. You know, a lot of people need glasses or magnifying glass, all sorts of things. So don't think you can just look in a hive and say, oh, yeah, I've got enough mites, I need to do something. If you can see mites in your hive, you've probably got a really high mite number already. So as part of the transition management, the code is being updated to reflect the need for ongoing intensive varroa management, meaning you need to keep looking, you need to keep on top of it. So in New South Wales, the recommendations for monitoring mites are an alcohol wash, soapy water wash, or a sugar shake. Each state has different regulations and recommendations, so check with your state to see what they recommend. And all of those methods and drone uncapping can be used to detect the initial presence of mites too. But one really important thing to note with drone uncapping is it's not a reliable method for determining treatment thresholds, meaning knowing the number of mites, like the percentage infestation on your bees, and it's time to do a management. And the VDOs in New South Wales have seen much variability in this versus wash results. In some, they get a lot of mites in washes, none in the drones. And in other ones, there are lots in the drones and barely any or low numbers in the wash. So it's not really accurate enough to say, I'm just going to do drone uncapping and then decide when I need to treat. But with the drone brood, take any opportunity to inspect drones, but also wash bees as well. So every time you pull off that excluder early in the season and they've got drones, if you're in an area that happens early in the season, have a look at all those drones there. Or target drone brood on different frames within the same hive. Skew a heap of them out and have a look at them. The one thing to remember is that mites can be obvious on the pupa, or they could be hiding in the base of the cell. So use glasses if they're needed because they're pretty small and they're not always easy to see. And if you are doing it, try not to wait until the drones are hatching. And that goes also, if you're doing drone removal as part of your varroa mite management, this is a day or two too late. You should be picking the drone brood up while it's all still capped and none of them have hatched because varroa mites breed up a lot quicker in drone brood than they do in worker brood. But the monitoring is critical to managing mites. When you start finding mites in washes, it means that there are already an increasing population of them within your hive and likely a bare minimum of 50 or 100 mites in the colony, if not more, probably more. So at some point soon, you'll need to implement management. As soon as you find mites, don't panic, but start thinking about when you're going to manage. Because if you find mites and do nothing about them, then please be aware that your hives will not magically survive the mite infestation. They will eventually fail. And I know that we put a lot of faith in our bees because they do amazing things, but mites will eventually take them out. We can't stop it. So please think about your bees. Also, if you don't do anything about it, you've basically failed to undertake your general biosecurity duty, which is basically to adequately manage that pest within your honeybee colony. You have a duty as a beekeeper to try to minimize the amount of pests, their impact on your bees, and also their presence after that will then impact other beekeepers. So you need to be on top of it. Prevention is better than a cure. And also compliance may find people that are like that. Others call such beekeepers a biosecurity risk, meaning they're a biosecurity risk to everyone around them, or other names which I'm not allowed to put up here. And constantly spreading Varroa and AFB to everyone around you is not something that you want for your reputation as a beekeeper. It's not on. You can't do that sort of thing. So look at the alcohol wash. And this is generally regarded as the quickest and most accurate method of detecting mites across the board. Lots of other methods have variables that make them more or less effective. Alcohol wash is a really good one. It's always very, very consistent. Now, the alcohol also kills the sample bees very quickly, so it is the most humane of all the methods. But very importantly, please make sure your queen is not amongst those bees that are getting washed. The commercially available washes are very easy to use, but they can often leak, so you do need to think about that. There are a lot of different homemade ones, but it's really, really important that you need to have it wide enough surface area so that the bees do not block the mesh, because that can actually stop mites from coming out. I've seen double-sided ones with peanut butter jars and the mesh was too small. We had 9 mites. We put they were in with the bees in that wash. The most we got out of it was 4. As soon as we put all that back in one of the commercially available washes, it went straight back up to 9 because the design allowed the mites to come out. So you might be better off just buying one because they do a very good job. But really importantly, be careful when you're using alcohol, methylated spirits or ethanol, as it's flammable. And you can't always see that flame. Often it's a blue or basically invisible flame. And that can also kill bees if you spill it. So if you're shaking over a hive and it's spilling, that could also kill bees. And really importantly, don't get it in your eye. So there are some safety issues there. But mites sink to the bottom really, really fast in alcohol. And the higher the alcohol level, the quicker those mites drop out. So they're really easy to spot. It's really, really easy. When you do that shake, bang, you see the mites straight away. And so here we have a very famous queen breeder in New South Wales. This was last week. He came to Tocal to look at mites because they do not have mites. So remember that. They don't have mites. He came to Tocal to have a look at mites. He was very intrigued at them. But see, that safe method of looking is well away. If any alcohol was to drip out of that, it's not going to get him. He's also got his glasses on so he can get a really good look at them. So if you need glasses, please put them on when you're looking for mites. So these are just some examples here. You might do your wash and put the bees on the lids until you're finished. You can see in the middle photo, there are 7 mites in there. There's also 1 sting, and the sting is a very similar size to a mite, except that it has a long bit on it, and it's often not quite as dark. There's also some rubbish in there, so you will get bits of rubbish. And on the one on the right there, you can see this is the first shake or the first wash from a sample of bees. There were 165 mites in that first wash. And then I took them out, I counted them, because it can be very hard to get an accurate number of mites. So that's a few mites. When you start counting them, it can be very amazing how many there actually are, more so than what you thought were there. After I did the second and third wash, I got 212 in total. For 300 bees, that's a pretty significant infestation rate of about 65%. So those bees are definitely going backwards when you get those sort of washes. So we've got the soapy water wash, and it's also an accurate and relatively fast method. The bees drown, so they do take longer to die than with alcohol. So you might want to think about that. If you would like your bees to not suffer, then alcohol is probably the way to go. It's also easier to undertake in a commercially available washer. It's best done using low suds type soap or windscreen washer fluid. And the really important reason for that is that when you get too many suds, it results in the mites being really hard to spot, as they may be floating on or within foam. So you can't easily see them. And also with that large amount of foam, it can make that washing process really hard, because if you're shaking it, basically there's so much foam in there that the bees are not really moving around much, and you're not physically removing mites. So there's less accuracy. So sometimes rolling may be better than shaking. So if you're going to use soapy water, try some different methods. And maybe when you're finished, give them an alcohol wash and see whether you get any more mites off them or not. If you don't get more mites off, you're doing a great job. That is if you had mites on the bees in the first place, obviously. But if you get a lot more mites off after you've done your soapy water wash, that may be an indicator you need to do it for longer, or you may need to change your technique. Another thing is the mites do not sink to the bottom as fast as with alcohol, so it's not always quite as easy to see them. They might move around a bit while you're moving the washer too. Now we've got the sugar shake. Under the right conditions, this method can be as accurate as the other two, but it's definitely far less effective when done in a moist or humid environment, or when bees are on a nectar flow. So therefore, it's considered less reliable by many people. To get an accurate result, it is also the slowest method to undertake if you're doing it properly. And you do need to add additional amounts of icing sugar after you've shaken out the first round. And it will also cause bee mortality, and that can be quite slow. So in a recent trial done by Sam, he had recorded 6.5% mortality with 1 hour, 16% mortality after 16 hours, and 25% after 48 hours. So a sugar shake will definitely kill bees. I know a lot of people prefer it because it doesn't kill bees, but we have found that it can be quite harsh on bees, and it takes a long, long time for them to perish. So in some ways, it's probably not the nicest way to do it. And it can definitely be harder to spot the mites. If we just look at the general process, you've shaken off your bees, they go into the sugar shake. There are different ones, but generally they have a lid with mesh. You can put the icing sugar in before or after. A lot of people prefer to put it in afterwards. And you can see that the bees will become covered in icing sugar. And during that time, bromites may be dislodged from the bees. So if you're then to shake those mites out, if you do it on a piece of white background, in that picture on the left, you can see there are 2 mites in there somewhere, but it's quite hard to see. I know there's a bit of shadow and stuff there, but it's quite hard to see that. And then in the middle one, there are 9 mites in there. And the close up on the right, there are 2 mites there, I think. Maybe there's some other stuff, but they're pretty hard to see. So you definitely need your glasses, because there's a lot of stuff interfering with that vision. So generally speaking, a lot of people would use a white or light coloured tub or bucket with clean water. meaning you don't have debris and other stuff already in it that's going to contaminate your result. You've got nice clean water, you shake the mites in and you'll see the mites. Generally, they'll float on the top initially. They may sink later on, but generally they float on top. And you may still need your glasses to see them properly. But you can see in there on that one on the right, their distinctive shape, that oval shape of varroa mite and the colour. Once you've seen them a bit, it becomes reasonably easy to keep identifying them pretty accurately as being varroa mites. But the critical importance of monitoring levels is if you don't look, you will not find. If you're not looking for them, how do you know what's there? So now that we know that Australia has mites and that they are quickly spreading through New South Wales, and that's obviously now by natural spread, which is moving pretty quick, and also beekeepers moving as part of their operation, which they're allowed to do. They're moving everywhere, and they may already be well into other states. If you're not looking in your state, you don't know if they're there already or not. So we need to accept that it's no longer if, but when your bees will get mites. It's coming. It may take a while, but it will happen. So if you're not looking yet, then please start now. Try out the different methods and see which one suits you best. Practice, practice, practice on your hives, meaning do your washes. Keep doing them. Make sure that you're accurate and that it's all working well, and try to make it part of your operation when you're doing particular work on your hive. At the same time, do a wash. And for a commercial beekeeper, your entire livelihood will depend on you managing mites in your bees. Some of those mites are going to come from other people's bees or from feral bees, but it'll be up to you to make sure that you manage them. So you need to be good at washing. All around the world, the good beekeepers keep on monitoring to make sure that they don't get behind with their varroa mite. So determining the right monitoring frequency is pretty critical. If you're in an area that already has mites, which you might know by referring to the heat map, all you do is type in your address or address of an apiary or nearby area and you'll see what's there. And it can be quite interesting sometimes to see, how many people have or haven't found mites. We might talk with fellow beekeepers and clubs to find out what's happening. But if there are already mites around, you should be monitoring frequently. Not every 16 weeks, probably every 4, maybe every 6 weeks, depending on your situation. In much of the world, which is where varroa is fully established and it's been there for a very long time, and the feral bee population has generally diminished by quite a high percent, there's still feral bees. Every year there are swarms, but those bees will eventually perish and be mite bombs. But a number of those has dropped off to when it was first occurring. Then they're often recommending to monitor maybe 4 or 5 times per year. And some of these places have pretty substantial winters too, where the bees probably even go broodless, and that's very good at managing mite numbers and making them low. Well, in New South Wales, we're in the build-up phase, and you need to look a lot more frequently than that, and that will occur in all the other states when it builds up. Don't think that 4 or 5 times a year is probably going to cut it. You need to be looking more than that. I've already monitored some of my hives 6 times this year and treated them twice. Last weekend, my mite numbers were 0 or 1 in a wash, but that could change very quickly. And it has been in nearby apiaries where I've been talking to those people. They got 29 mites in one colony today. So the mite numbers are all over the place, and you cannot assume anything with mites. If I don't wash enough hives and I just think they're all 0s to 1, well, I might have a couple of hives that have really high mite numbers, and those hives are going to go backwards. So you need to keep on looking. So when bees are building up fast in the spring, the mite numbers do not seem to increase quickly because the bee population is expanding very, very fast, and it's probably expanding quicker than the mites. But then when the bees swarm and you lose half the bees, but you still got most of that mite population under the brood cap, or the breeding rate slow down, the mite numbers will explode pretty quickly. And once the mites start getting up it keeps going up very, very quickly. So if you don't look, then you'll miss this critical shift. And that's part of your management. You need to know when you need to start treating. So if Varroa has not been found in your area, then you're likely quite worried about it arriving. To alleviate this concern, you should be monitoring many of your hives frequently. Don't just stick your head in the sand and say, I'm not going to look. Get out there and start looking. You want to know, don't you, if you've got mites or not? So get out there and look, just like your AFB. I know some guys out there, they go and then they start to get all itchy and stuff and cranky, and then it's finally time to do another brood check. They go through all of their hives. I'm talking thousands of hives. They find their AFB, they know how many they've got, they deal with them, they get rid of them, and then they're happy again. They've sorted out their problem, and now it can build up again slowly. It's exactly the same with mites. Keep on looking. If you don't have any mites, all good, schedule to look a bit later on. So if you've got less than 10 hives in apiary, then you should probably sample all 10 of them over a 2 to 3 month period. So maybe you do half each month, and then the others the next month, etc. But preferably more frequently if you can. Now, it's only 300 bees you're taking from a hive. A queen can lay 2,000 eggs a day. Okay, 300 is, it's not even a little speed hump on the road. It's nothing. It's a pebble. The colony can handle it. If your colony cannot handle having 300 bees removed, and now nurse bees removed from it, you have bigger issues. It's not Varroa mite that's your problem. You've got a problem with management in that hive. It's either queenless or something's going on. They should be able to donate 300 bees whenever you need to take them. If you run commercial loads of bees, then you should be washing at least 10 or at least 10% if you've got more than 100 in a load. And you should be doing that every 1 or 2 months or more frequently. Not doing it. You're just going to become a big problem to yourself and others if you don't look, because it'll sneak up and it'll smash you when you least want it to. So please get out there and start looking. So if Varroa has been found in your area, then you're far less worried about Varroa arriving. And I'll be honest here, there's a first shock when you actually find it, but then there's a sense of relief. I finally got Varroa. Now I can get on with the beekeeping I'm going to be doing for the rest of my beekeeping life. You've moved. The fear of getting Varroa is worse than Varroa itself sometimes, unless you do nothing about it. But obviously, once you got it, you're more worried about managing it. So to alleviate this concern, you probably should be monitoring many of your hives frequently. And didn't I just say that about when having no Varroa in the area too? Yes, I did. And that's because everybody should be monitoring for Varroa frequently. Everyone. No one is immune to that. Everyone should be out there looking for Varroa mites. And when I say everybody, I don't just mean every beekeeper in New South Wales, where we're awash with mites, but also those in the rest of Australia and also Tasmania, which could be part of Australia, but some people think that maybe it isn't, but it is. So start looking if you're not already. And for those that have brawler, you may want to make sure that you can clearly identify what is a brawler and what is a Varroa mite, because they're sort of similar size, but they're very different in their appearance. So if Varroa has been found in your area, then you should be monitoring for Varroa very frequently. Very frequently. Don't be complacent. Once you have mites, keep on top of them. If you've got less than 10 hives in apiary, then you may want to sample all 10 of them over a 4 to 6 week period, perhaps thirds or half every few weeks, and then the others in the next month, etc. If you run commercial loads of bees, then you should be looking at least 10 or at least 10%, if more than 100 in a load every 4 to 6 weeks. And the reason for that is a lot can sometimes happen during that time frame. You know, people think about, oh yes, Varroa breed up very slowly. But when there's reinfestation happening, it can go from near zero to very high numbers in 4 to 6 weeks. At that critical time of the year, Robbie behaviour from your bees, there's nothing happening. If you've got weak feral colonies full of mites, your bees are going to smash them and they're going to bring all those mites back home to you. So you need to be looking so that you can be on top of that and manage your bees. When the treatment threshold is reached, you would treat and then follow up with a wash straight afterwards to see how well the treatment worked. There's a lot of talk about having resistance to chemicals and all this sort of stuff. We need to make sure that what we just spent a lot of money on has actually worked. If it worked properly, or if we need to retreat. If you find at the end of a treatment that you're already back at a treatment threshold, then you will need to prepare to retreat again using a different chemical with a different mode of action. If post-treatment wash was 0, meaning your treatment has done a really good job and you have no mites, then go back and test 4 weeks later. You want to see what has happened, because a lot can happen in a short period of time depending on what reinfestation is occurring in your area. Could be nothing. There could be no mites after 4 weeks, and you can be happy and clap and do a little dance, or you might be up at 30 or 40 mites in a wash, depending on what's happening. So please go and look. We talk about 300 bees in a sample. So a half cup of bees is around 300. So in trials, we've counted anywhere from 287 up to 328 bees in a half cup. And I'm sure if we did more, we could get higher and lower numbers. But roughly, that's about half a cup of bees. So fat bees will have less numbers in a half cup than skinny bees. So please use new foundation and combs in your brood box every year. Keep putting in new foundation so you've got nice fat bees. Don't leave combs in there until they're 10 years old and they're really thick walled and you've got these tiny little bees coming out. Keep replacing your brood comb. Also, you'll find that field bees may still be flying off after you level or overfill the measure. So you just need to accept that there will be some inaccuracy in this whole process. So just try your best to get a good half cup to sample. Sometimes it's a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. The more bees you sample, the more likely it is that you'll find mites. And this difference is acceptable, as the precision required to determine when to treat for mites is also quite loose anyway. You know, if it's a difference between 1 and 2 mites, that doesn't make much. If you've got 5 mites or 20 mites, it's very easy to work out what you need to do. So assuming that you have a reasonably consistent number of bees in each sample, as in a half cup, then it becomes very easy to determine the percentage infestation rate of those nurse bees. So if you find 1 mite in 300 bees, and they're nurse bees, then for me personally, there's nothing to worry about. I don't care anymore if I find 1 or 2 or 3 mites in a wash. That happens all the time. But if you've never had mites before, then it probably is. And if that happens to you soon, then welcome to the new way of beekeeping in Australia, because it's coming soon to all beehives near you. So get ready. But that is also 1 mite over 300 bees times 100 equals 0.33% infestation rate, if you want to look at it mathematically that way. And the infestation rate is the number of varroa per 100 bees. But personally, I find it easier just using the number of mites found divided by how many hundreds of bees. So 300 bees equals 3. So if I have 1 mite in a wash, it is 1 divided by 3, which equals 1/3% or 0.33%, which is the same thing. If I found 9 mites, then that is 9 over 3, and that's 3% infestation rate, which is a pretty important number. A lot of places around the world with viruses, that's the economic threshold. If you don't treat mites for mites when you reach that level, it is going to cost you through viral impacts on your bee colony that are going to make your bees go down. Here in Australia, we don't currently have that issue, but still it's a very important number, because you do think about in summer, you'd be treating. Right now, if you get those sort of numbers, you'd probably definitely be treating very soon after that. So those numbers are starting to get up and impact bees. If you found 58 mites, that's 58 over 3. So that's 19% or so. That's getting up there. So if there were 287 bees, then that would have been 58 over 2.87, which is 20%. So not much difference. Or if it was 328 bees, and it's 58 over 3.28, this is 328, which is 3.28 100ths, and that's nearly 18%. So you can see, even with that variation in the actual numbers of bees in your half cup, that infestation rate is pretty similar in that it's all high. So once you start finding mites, it's game on. You've got to start thinking about it. If there were 277 mites and 328 bees, that's 277 over 328, which is 84.5% infestation rate. That's pretty whopping when you find that sort of thing. Either way, once the infestation rates start getting above 1 to 3%, you really would need to think about treating, and that can be seasonally dependent. And, you're not looking for a highly accurate count of how many bees are in there. But if you do want that, especially if you conduct research, then you'd simply count all the dead bees after the alcohol wash was completed to achieve that. And you could get your 3.28 or your 2.87 over the number of mites. So it's pretty easy to do that too. And so here we have 277 mites, which came out of 328 bees in October last year. I looked at that and I thought, oh yeah, there's 100. Bianca was feeling rather bored, so she and her husband counted them all more accurately and got 277. So well done. It's amazing how many mites you can actually get in there. So don't be complacent. Make sure that you count those accurately. And to get that really accurate result, you need to sample the correct bees. You want the best sample, so you've got to get the correct bees for that. You definitely do not take bees out of your honey box or foraging field bees at the entrance. You don't take them. In a normal bee colony that is rearing brood, the correct bees sample the nurse bees found on brood frames. So generally a frame with a mixture of capped and uncapped brood is the best one to sample bees from. Maybe you'll take bees from a couple of frames to mix it up, but just make sure that you've got that nice mix of the capped and uncapped brood to get a good sort of round sort of quota of bees from the different age classes doing the different things in that brood nest. So you grab it from the brood nest. So very importantly, you pull off any honey boxes, and if you have a queen excluder, that comes off. Very importantly, people need to take queen excluders off beehives. Make sure they don't damage that excluder when they take off. Don't use the hive tool pulling up on the hive tool and denting that queen excluder, but you have to take your queen excluder off many times in a season and get down and look in the brood nest. Not just for doing this, but looking for AFB when you do your brood inspections. So this is a frame. This came from one of the Sentinel hives. You can't quite see it, but there's a lot of uncapped brood in there as well. There's drones, there's capped workers as well. And there was a nice big sample in the Bee Catch 2.5 Mark 1, which did a great job. That was very good for getting your bees into that. But you can use any tub or receptacle. Best one with a rounded edge, because when you do use your half cup measure, that is an easy way to get them without mashing any bees up. But you can also do this straight off a lid or out of off a mat. Anything like that will work. A nice rounded half cup scoop of bees is great. So the reason for selecting brood bees is that Varroa reproduce in bee brood. Generally, about 2/3 of the hive's entire mite population is normally under the capped brood at any one time. That can change, obviously, and if it's a swarm or whatnot, that's not the case. But normally, when you have brood in a colony, most of the mites are under that in their reproductive phase. So the other 1/3 is mostly concentrated around the brood area, either on newly emerged baby bees that they are still feeding on after they also fed on it as a pupa developing bee when they were under the brood cap, or feeding on a nurse bee whilst they prepare to enter an engorged pupa, which is basically in that last stage before it gets capped. It's being fed like crazy. The varroa mites slip in there and then it gets capped. So that's where you find a lot of mites. But the phoretic mites, which are the ones that are on adult bees, they're the ones that we are able to sample. So the field bees are not needed nor wanted in this sample. So don't take your sample bees from the honey super, and please do not put your miticide strips in the honey super either. They go in the brood nest as well. So when you do take that perfect frame to shake your bees from, allow field bees to fly off. Often if you put a frame there and just leave it for a minute or two, a lot of bees will just fly off it. They're generally field bees. After you've shaken the bees into a tub or on your mat, etc., then you can also allow more field bees to fly off, and then you can collect your half cup from the remainder. So don't panic if a lot of bees seem to be disappearing. That's just making your sample better. If there aren't enough bees in there for your half cup, though, you might need to shake bees from another frame. In a trial in March 22, we collected a wash result of 3%, which was 9 mites in a wash, in both a single half cup wash, and we also averaged that out over 6 half cups in a bulk wash, where we put those in, and we got a heap of mites, and that worked out at 9 mites per wash, or per half cup sample, I should say. We also vacuumed up 450 field bees exiting and arriving back to that colony, and we found only 1 mite. And that mite may have been a reinvading mite coming in from the environment, or it may have gone out and come back on that field bee. But whatever the case, the number of mites that we found on the field bees from that same colony was 13 times less than on its nurse bees. So always sample nurse bees. If you're seeing mites on field bees that are in the hive, it often means there's either a lot of reinfestation going on, or you have a really high mite population in your colony already. So don't muck around. Choose the best technique. And I'll just say it straight up, alcohol wash is the fastest, most accurate and humane method for monitoring for varroa mites. Sam did a trial this week that showed that a sugar shake was inaccurate, especially when high humidity and a nectar flow was present. He had both, and it also kills the bees, but more slowly. He found 2 mites from the sugar shake, and he did it very thoroughly and with 2 sugar applications. So he put the sugar in, he gave it a very good roll, left it for a while, shook that out, and then he did the whole process again, which a lot of people don't even do that with a sugar shake. They do it once and that's it. He then found a further 17 mites when he alcohol washed those same bees after the sugar shake. 17 mites. So if you look at the sugar shake result of 2 mites, that seemed fine. 2 mites, don't worry about it. 19 means treat it straight away. So we can see here that there's a real variability in a sugar shake. But also Mark and Kelly did one today, and they got 9 mites using a sugar shake. But then they found 20 more mites when they did a soapy water wash. So again, in these situations, the sugar shake has not been very accurate. So 9 mites is already getting pretty high, but when you find that your colony has 29, that's over 3 times higher than what the sugar shake said. And that colony is probably starting to head backwards by that point. So if you'd only taken what the sugar shake said, oh, my bees look pretty good, you're in for a rude shock, because 29 is going to go up very quickly and you're going to have 60, 90 or more mites in a short matter of time. And one thing to note, though, there was a lot of drone brood in that hive, and it's had drone brood all winter. And so it did have a lot of mites. The other hives in that apiary were only 0 to 1 mites in a wash. So see that huge variability over all of the hives in that apiary. So that's why you've got to keep looking at different hives regularly to look for mites. So to best manage your bees, please use a technique that gives reliable results. which the sugar shake cannot always do. At times, it's been proven to be as accurate as an alcohol wash, but it's probably in the perfect humidity, no honey flow, and things like that. And we cannot always have that. In a lot of places, we always have some sort of a honey flow, a little bit of nectar, just makes that sugar a bit more gummy, and it just doesn't work. So if we look at it this way, sacrificing 300 bees to save many tens of thousands, meaning your colony, saving the rest of the colony, makes a lot more sense than prolonging the life of 200 or 220 or 30 of those bees from a sugar shake and then losing the entire colony soon after. And varroa development officers have seen that happening a lot in New South Wales. A lot of people have been saying, my bees have been poisoned. And eventually it's coming back to very high mite numbers. And some of those people have been using sugar shakes and not finding mites. Some of them may have been sampling from the wrong area of the hive. Maybe they're doing it when it was high humidity. But when VDOs have tested using alcohol washes, they've found very high numbers of mites that weren't being found with a sugar shake. So, I really do think, please, maybe try the alcohol wash and see how it works for you. It becomes a tool and you should be using it. So sample lots of hives frequently using alcohol wash. You don't have mites. This is a suggestion for areas without mites. Use it anyway. Use that technique. Look, because you might actually have mites in low numbers already, but if you're not sampling correctly, then you don't know that. And look at bulk washing. If you don't have mites, but you want to look at a lot of hives, it's a really good technique. So basically, this is what I used. I basically just had a container which you could put a larger number of half-cup samples in and a lot more metho. A couple of 10-litre buckets. We've got a rainwater tank screen that easily goes between them. We've got a paint strainer bag, which the mites will stop in. And then you've got a bigger container which will actually catch the bees. And so you do that, and it's quite accurate. So this was a comparison here, and basically the mite numbers worked out on the left were 6 times higher than in the one wash on the right. So if you're looking for mites and you want to do it quickly, that will work for you. But once you've found mites, you can't keep using this because you can't get that high count per hive reading. You'll only get an average. So if you had 12 mites in one hive and none in the others, you'll think you've only got 2 mites. You've actually got one hive with 12 mites, and you need to look at treating straight away. And if you've got a window on your hive and you can look inside and you see this on one of your bees, you know that you've got a high infestation. And this was from the colony that had 84.5% infestation. When you can visibly see mites on bees within the colony, you know you have a problem. So I'd like to say thank you now. I hope that I haven't sent you all to sleep. I hope I haven't scared you all, because varroa is a scary thing. Back in 2019, when I went to New Zealand, it took us a week before we actually found any live varroa mites, because the beekeepers were doing such a good job at managing their mites. And that's when I realised you can continue beekeeping in the presence of varroa mites, but it's up to you to manage your bees so that they have low numbers of mites and they can do all those amazing things that we like them for already. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Rod. I think everybody is going to go out tomorrow and either buy the gear they need, or they're going to get out in the apiary and get that sample and have a look around. You've been really encouraging, and for all the right reasons. We have got lots of questions, but I might just give you a bit of a brain break. And I'm going to put some questions through to the other folks in the background. So the first query that I wanted to put through, and thank you everybody for putting questions in. We've had over 33 questions, which have been really interesting questions that we'd love to get to. So I'm going to do my best to try and put them together into groups, and hopefully some of them will cover. And what we don't get to cover, we will definitely work on bringing through to the beekeepers who really want to know the answers to them, either another webinar or some other particular way. So the first question, I'd like to bring Tamara in for this one, because you're the leader of our T2M nationally. So Tamara, we had a query about the T2M plan to deliver the 25 remaining workshops in Victoria, but I wanted to talk to workshops in general, the training workshops, and are the VDO talks that clubs might be getting calls from Varroa development officers around Australia. Are they replacing the workshops? And can you talk a little bit about the difference and what people should be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bianca. Look, there's been some great questions coming in, and I can answer that one really quickly. No, workshops are definitely going ahead. We have, I think the question was around Victoria. We have 25 workshops to deliver in Victoria, 110 around the nation. They're a full day of training that's provided free of charge. You even can have a free sandwich and a cup of tea, possibly a cake at a good venue. And we'd really strongly encourage you to get to a workshop if you can, if they're within your area. Those workshops are a full day on the types of treatments that are available, a lot more detail about the Varroa life cycle, integrated pest management, and lots of other things that will be really helpful, along with the opportunity to network with some of your fellow beekeepers, which might be helpful, particularly as Varroa starts to get to your area. So yeah, please get along to a workshop if you can. There's 5 currently live for Vic on Humanitix. If you want to follow our Humanitix page, you'll get notifications whenever new courses are added. We still have a lot to add there in every state. So join up to the Humanitix page and get advice when those are available. Now, if you are having a bee club meeting, or you are, or you found Varroa, or you want a hand to understand how to best manage Varroa in your apiary, reach out to one of our VDOs. So we've got funding to have the VDOs on until February 26 in some states, but in other states they're finishing earlier. So in New South Wales, for example, most of our VDOs will start to finish up in the first half of next year. So I'd really strongly, again, encourage you, if you want a hand, if you want someone to come present to a smaller group meeting, reach out to your VDOs. They can do a shorter version of the full day workshop where they can answer more questions, and you can open a hive and have a bit of a fiddle around and see some practical demonstrations on how things work. With those, they can answer any detailed questions. So that's the difference between the two. Both are certainly available, and please take advantage of them while they're there.
Yeah, great. So you can find the Humanitix by just searching Varroa Humanitix, or you can look at the varroa.org.au website for all of that information. So there'll be links to training, there'll be links to VDO contacts in there now. So jump in if you're looking for it. That's the best place. So someone talked about how's the Varroa going in Queensland. So to date, we have no positive reports at all of Varroa being in Queensland.
No.
But I wanted you to talk a little bit about the stats. So
yeah,
we've had a very good rivalry between New South Wales and Queensland forever. But this one, this one's a little bit
based in New South, so hopefully Queensland can win on the Varroa count front. No, hopefully not. Look, there are no reports of Varroa in Queensland, but my confidence in that is not huge. Similarly, there's been no reports on the North Coast along that Queensland border either. And again, I'm not overly confident. So the stats as they currently stand today are that we've had 78 reports of Varroa testing in over 1,000 hives in Queensland this month. Now there's currently over 10,000 beekeepers and 163,000 hives in Queensland. So that number is dismally low. And I would really, if you're a Queensland beekeeper, I don't mean to have a go at you, but please, if you haven't, please get on and check your hive and report, because the quicker we can find where Varroa is up to, if we can find the edge of that spread, it helps us to try and pull those resources, the workshops, VDO attendance, into those areas where they're fighting an incursion. And as we've seen in New South Wales, 66 days we've had colonies which have died out with massive levels of Varroa. So it's really critical that you monitor really very frequently and report those so that your fellow beekeepers are aware of whether they've got Varroa or not, whether to be concerned.
That's right.
So
and it's spring now, in most cases, even in Tassie, it's time to start looking in your hives, doing your brood checks, and not being hesitant and starting to learn, even if you might be living under a rock and you might think you're never going to get Varroa, but even now it is a great time to get in and start practicing doing all of the monitoring that Rod spoke about, and get good at it, because you're going to need to be for the future. We had another query that I'd still wanted to pester you about, if that's okay, and it's about oxalic acid. So we wanted to ask how much closer are we to having oxalic acid approved
Yeah.
It is we do have some other webinars that talked about chemicals,
Yeah.
but I'd like to just see if you have an update for the industry for that one.
Yeah, look, we're waiting with bated breath, as I know you all are as well. So the approval for the use of oxalic acid is sitting with the APVMA. That was submitted in February, so 7 months ago. Usually approvals sort of 9 to 12 months. We had a massive win a couple of weeks ago. We were asked to comment on the draft emergency permit, which would accompany oxalic acid when approved by the APVMA. So we're hoping that it's getting closer. To me, that indicates they're working on it, and it should be getting closer. I can't tell you what that date is. It's outside of our sphere of control. But importantly, this is an emergency use permit. It's not going to be, as of yet, a full product registration, and it's only for the dribble and the fogging applications. We'll get further details about the other methods of application from those manufacturers who are also working with the APVMA with their products, including for AluneCap. So as soon as we hear any more information, as soon as we get an approval, we'll get that out to you as soon as possible through our network. So again, if you haven't subscribed for our weekly updates, I'd encourage you to subscribe. If you can, I might get someone to share that link with people that have registered so that you can sign up. And that's the way that we'll get information out to all of you. So yeah, please sign up for those weekly updates so we can let you know as soon as that oxalic acid permit is issued.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to switch over to Rod now in the hot seat. So I'm starting off with a couple of easy ones, Rod, and then it's just going to get harder and harder from there. So the first one is really just a great question. And I'm sure that there's people out there that haven't asked this question. I have found mites. What do I do to get rid of them?
Okay, well, if you don't know how to get rid of them, one of the first things you probably should do is contact the VDO or go to some of the varroa management training if it's still available in your area, because you do need to learn about these things. There's a lot to learn about, and it's a real challenge. Obviously, at the end of the day, you look at IPM, integrated pest management, at ways to reduce their increase and that sort of thing, but there will be at some point probably the need to use chemicals. But there are so many techniques. I already dawdled on for an hour when you said we're going to be finished 15 minutes ago, so I won't go through everything, but you need to learn about your new enemy. So
yes, and on top of that, can people treat preemptively for varroa?
Prophylactically, no, you're just wasting money, and you're also putting additional chemical in your hive. Like a lot of people resisted surveillance using strips in their hives because they don't want chemicals. So why use chemicals if you don't need to? When you need to, the synthetic chemicals are very, very effective, but they all have drawbacks and you need to know about them. So no, you get varroa mite and then you determine at what time you need to treat. You've got to keep them in that zone, we'll never get back to zero. You'll never have zero mites in your hives ever again, or if you do, it'll be for such a short period of time, it doesn't matter. You'll always have mites, and so you just need to make sure that their numbers don't get too high.
Lovely. Yep, that's a tough answer, but it's true. So the next one is, do we need to continue to log positive tests of varroa? Even this is obviously a person, maybe just a New South Wales beekeeper.
Yeah,
we're hoping.
Yep.
So they've tested their hives positive in April and did the report. Do they need to continue to report when they do their washes that they've got a positive test?
Yeah, well, so if they had a positive in April and they have done a treatment and come back as zero later on, that's great. It's worked well. But yes, when the varroa mites build up again, you do need to report it. It is legally obligated that you notify about varroa mite. You wouldn't report it every single day from the apiary, but if you report that an apiary has varroa mites and then you do a treatment, and then later on you have varroa mites again, yes, you would need to report it, because that is all showing as information on the heat map as to the frequency of varroa mites in the area. And if you keep on getting varroa mites, you've got to let people know, because that's probably indicating a lot of reinfestation and all that. And that information helps other beekeepers because there are a lot of beekeepers out there that utilize the heat map all the time, working out what's going on in their area.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you might do a treatment and get a negative, and you can report the negative. But as you said, you're never going to get rid of Varroa. So when you go and test them again and you find it again, you've got to put that detail through. And I think what will also be important is beekeepers are free to move around the state. They've got to keep their own records, but they can still take those hives when they got a negative because they've treated. They can take those hives and they might do their alcohol wash at a different location. They still have to do that report, right? So yeah, so we can then understand a little bit more about where Varroa is as beekeepers to know whether the decision we're making to move areas is worthwhile. The next one I wanted to put to you, Rod, was a lot of questions around drone uncapping came in. I'm just going to read it straight up. So it says, when drone uncapping, if 5+ mites are found in the cooler months and 9+ mites found in the summer months, do we assume the hive has reached treatment threshold, or must we follow up with alcohol wash, sugar shake, or soapy water wash? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, and that's a latter. And like, there've been a lot of things that people may misunderstand some of the numbers, but like drone uncapping it's not an accurate way to determine the actual number of mites that you're seeing in the brood area on nurse bees. And that, so we consistently use washes to work out when it is time to treat a hive. So no, looking at the number of mites on drones is not an accurate way to determine when you would need to treat. You need to do a wash. So generally speaking, if you found mites in drones, you would then follow up. For me, I'd follow up with an alcohol wash. And I have been talking to some of the VDOs, I mentioned it before, but they found huge inconsistencies between the number of Varroa that they were finding in drone uncapping and the number of mites they were washing from the exact same hives. And different apiaries were different. It all depended on when the mites came in and whether the bees were rearing drones when that happened, because Varroa mites are very much more attracted to drone brood than worker brood. So if it's there, drones will use it because they have better reproductive success. But it's not an accurate way to determine when you need to treat. So you need to do, preferably, in my opinion, an alcohol wash and read those numbers for your treatments.
Yeah, there's quite a few variables as to where drones would be in a colony, why they would be there, without, assessing all of those other things about your queen vigor, about the time of year, about the colony in general. So there is just so many sort of variations if you're checking drones only. The other thing I wanted to mention is there's copious studies around the 300 bee sample of bees from a brood frame that is so much more effective. So the reason we're doing that is based on many numerous studies in the past that have shown that 300 bee sample is a much better statistically valid sample of the colony itself. So yeah, we really just want to encourage people to look. Yeah, go ahead if you want to look at drones, but don't use it to make your treatment decisions. And certainly, yeah, you're not going to have drones all year round in some places, especially, wherever we get good cold weather. There's plenty of places around where bees are and beekeepers are. The next one is about, it's an interesting question. There was kind of two that were very similar, so I put them together. What happens if you're in the middle of a heavy flow of honey and you need to treat? You realised you've got a threshold above and you need to treat those bees. How does the hive then cope with no supers while it's still collecting nectar? What's the recommended advice for that?
Okay, so yeah, that is an interesting one, and the answer for that, if you're using synthetic chemicals, is Baverol is the only treatment that you could look at using. It can be used with honey supers on, but it's being heavily used at other times as well. So if we look down the track, a lot of countries, a lot of areas, Baverol doesn't work anymore because the Varroa mite has developed resistance because I've used it too frequently. So realistically, whenever you've got hives without supers on, you should be looking at one of the other chemicals that has a different mode of action for killing mites than Baverol. So that's basically, you're looking at the amitraz-based chemicals, could be used when it's a single box colony. But when you're on a honey flow, you've either got to look at formic acid, which also has some temperature regulation issues when you can use it, or Baverol. They would realistically be your currently only legally approved methods. Obviously, if oxalic acid comes onto the scene, that is another option, but we don't currently have that, so I'm not going to tell you to go out and use it yet. But if it becomes approved, then it would be another one that you have in your toolbox there as well.
Potentially, yeah. And a lot of stories from overseas is also leading to the fact that oxalic is really good when there's no brood present as an effective treatment. So yeah, look, if that was your question out there, audience, I suggest you get to the workshops and get in touch with the Varroa Development Officer so that you can have some tailored advice, because it is really difficult to give beekeepers in this space, at least, advice that is absolute. It really is a challenge, and it's something that beekeepers are going to, we expect them to reach out for additional help and conversation around some of those types of questions.
I'll probably just add too, so one of the things about varroa mites is that sometimes it forces you to change the way you're doing something. You need to treat the mites, which means you don't also have the added luxury of potentially chasing a particular honey flow or something, depending on what chemical you use. There are so many variables in place with the different treatments and everything. And it always gets, during the training, we get to synthetic chemicals, and a lot of people start to realize the complexity and the fact that they need to plan stuff. And so that's why we didn't want varroa mites, because it makes something so complex at times. So there are many, you've got to make economic decisions, and that might be that if you had to use a particular chemical, well, your honey flow is over. If you can't use something that's going to work, you do need to move those bees and do stuff, which is a major inconvenience for you. But if you need to treat those mites, then you've got to do it. Or you might decide not to treat, and 3 weeks later your hives are really on the brink of collapse, and then you pull them out and treat. And you've got to weigh everything up, and that takes a lot of time and experience. And none of us beekeeping in Australia that haven't worked elsewhere around the world have much of that experience yet. So it's a big learning curve.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. I'll give you a break. I'll go. We've got Emily Nordyke, who's a Varroa Development Officer in New South Wales, who's been on our webinars in the past. Welcome, Emily. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Bianca.
I would like to just ask you a query now about a couple of similar content. So the first one is, although we have Varroa, we do not have the viruses that Varroa have spread in other countries. Does this mean that our bees perhaps are not as susceptible to colony collapse? So can you just break that down for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So I guess first, we do have some viruses present in Australia that Varroa is able to spread, but deformed wing virus is kind of the main one that everyone's talking about, that's overseas, but we have not detected in Australia. So that being said, the mites do still cause decline and can lead to death in colonies. We are seeing that, unfortunately, in New South Wales at the moment, especially during this build-up phase as mites are spreading, and sometimes the reinfestation rates are quite great. So despite deformed wing virus not being present, we're still seeing colony decline if beekeepers don't intervene. And we're still figuring out how that impacts in the Australian environment and in this context. So we're learning what our treatment thresholds might be in the future. There's still a lot to learn depending on the virus presence, virus absence. And in terms of colony collapse, so colony collapse disorder is something else, something separate to what we see with varroa mite infestation and decline. So it's kind of its own suite of symptoms that can be due to a combination of different factors. Yeah, I know there's a lot to unpack there, Bianca. Is there anything else you have to add?
No, like I think that's good. I think there's a real distinction between what we're seeing, what's happening in the reality now in the areas we know Varroa is doing this in colonies in New South Wales. And yeah, that real difference between what is colony collapse disorder and then what we're seeing is really PMS. It's parasitic mite syndrome, and it's this, disastrous thing, because we know that Varroa doesn't kill a bee, but it does kill the colony. And it's that extended time they've spent trying to battle on with Varroa going on inside their colony. And that's that reality that you guys, you Varroa development officers, are really capturing that in a lot of visits lately. So no, that's great. I just had one other question, and I think we will wrap up after this one because we're way beyond the time I thought we would be, which is great because we've still got heaps of people online listening. So thank you so much to everyone for hanging on. This one is a really important one, and I think it speaks a little bit about the Varroa viruses, that we don't have, and it's a pointy question. So why? I'll just figure out where it is on my page. Can we now import queens more conditioned to Varroa, or is that still a no?
Right. Yeah, there are risks involved with queen importation, so it is not legal and not allowed unless under very strict quarantine. I don't know all of the rules around quarantine, but I have heard it is very strict. So yeah, that's just to remove risk of importing those exotic viruses, right? So like deformed wing virus, we want to make sure that would absolutely not be present in anything we would import.
Yeah, we do have a really strict quarantine system. So yeah, absolutely. It's illegal to do that if you're not using those amazing systems that we have in place to keep us safe. But yeah, like I think it's great to continue talking about importation in any case in that system, the benefit or not.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely encouraged to look for any potential tolerance or resistance traits to Varroa within our own stock. It's a long-term goal. It's going to take a long term for breeders and beekeepers to find potential traits and select for them to get those reliably in our stock. And those traits are also not highly heritable either. So that means that if queens aren't mated in a very controlled way, those traits can be lost in the next generations. So there's a lot involved there. It's a long-term game, but it would be a great thing to start seeing selection in Australia and stuff.
Yeah, it's a big long battle that we're starting to really understand the uniqueness of it, I think. Yeah. And we've certainly had programs in the past as well, and in the future that will work on that. But yeah, lots of there's a touch on that information in the workshops going on around the country. So definitely people who are interested need to get to those workshops where they're present near them. Have a look at that webpage, varroa.org.au, to get access to find out where those workshops are for you. And obviously on the same website, details for beekeepers to get in contact with the Varroa development officer in their state. So that hands-on practical help for management day-to-day of Varroa, and also the management looking for Varroa. So just because you might be in a state that doesn't currently have Varroa doesn't actually mean that you will go without a VDO. So there are VDOs across every state and territory. So reach out to that website and have a look around to see if you can find someone who can come to you. We have run over time, or we're on time-ish, but I feel like we have very long videos that people may not like to watch at the end. So what we're going to do, we've got quite a few questions that we'll hold on to, and we'll use them to shape the next couple of webinars, and we might even use them to shape a couple of the emails that we send out over the next few weeks from the national program. So I apologise to the people who've got some sitting there waiting, and there's only a handful, so it's not going to be too dramatic, but we really encourage you to jump onto that varroa.org.au website, register for the updates that you can receive. And I really just also thank you all for being there in the background. So Rod, Emily, Tamara, Jamie and Joe, there's so many people in the program that actually help get these types of webinars underway. And I think we've had a really successful one today talking about everything that beekeepers can do now, regardless of where you are, is get monitoring and get reporting as well. So report the negatives, report the positives, and yeah, get into your bees if that's what you love to do and you want to keep them. You definitely need to have a look around and make sure that you're on top of any risk of varroa. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I hope you have a lovely evening.